help us, Vicky? You're back again, huh?
I'm back again, yep.
How's Anderson?
She's doing pretty well. I talk to her every once in a while. She had a baby, you know. Yeah, she had a, I think 11 pounds, 15 ounces.
Oh, yeah, a toddler.
I think it was born, it had a goatee and hair on its head.
Yeah, I guess so.
Cigar in his mouth, and it was,
Wow.
I mean, oh man, talk about a big baby.
I saw that him and his wife had a baby not long ago. I was a year ago almost now. I saw about 7.
Yeah. So,
Bang.
that was twice the size of my first one, so I can't even imagine, but I think so her son is now almost 6 months old, and I think he's like 24 or 25 pounds, which 20 pounds, typically I think about around a year is normal for hitting 20 pounds. He's at 25 and 6, so.
I don't know how big our twins will be, but I think if I had two, there were 11 pounds in there. I don't know if Tia's going to be able to get up out of the bed. So I'm guessing they'll be small.
Your doctor lets her go for 11 pounds for twins?
No, I don't think so. I think they will be taking care of business for us.
7 o'clock, I will be willing to join me and pledge allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
roll call, please.
Trustee Benson?
Here.
Trustee Gunther?
Here.
Pro Tem Jackson?
Here.
Trustee Mead? Trustee Pelfrey?
Here.
Trustee Barran? President Howard?
Yeah. Next item on the agenda, public comments. I don't see anybody from the public here, so we'll move on to the next item. Consent agenda, any additions, deletion to the agenda? Any additions or deletions? If no additions or deletion, need approval of the agenda as presented. Need a motion for that? The consent, yeah, for the consent agenda, okay.
I'll support.
Okay, who made the motion first? Okay, trustee Pelfrey.
Lone Ranger.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. And finished business, water CIP, capital improvement revision.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I'll touch on, and I think Mickey would probably agree with me here, is that with our capital improvement plans, whether we're talking about water or sewer, stormwater, these are always kind of works in progress. So, we take kind of our best guess with looking out. Some of these are 20 years out. So as things change or as we discover different things, we have to come in and make amendments if we need to. And one of the things that Jimmy and I talked about as we were looking through the CDBG grant application was this was primarily focused on water infrastructure. And so when I talked to Jimmy, a few different things have changed over the time since the water AMP was completed. And lead and copper rules were something that really weren't a factor when this first came out. And we had talked about St. Mary's Street a couple different times leading up to it, but in terms of priority, I think Cedar Street and kind of that area was given a little bit higher priority there. And looking at the cost, we said, okay, well, what do we need that's essential? What can we push off to a later time? And so St. Mary's kind of got a little bit lost on the wayside there. When we started looking at this project, I went to Jimmy and said, hey, looking at water assets, what do you think is the most important thing? And, he looked and said, I don't know if we got it into our most recent plan. He said, but I've really had a lot of concerns with St. Mary's. We've had several breaks in that line over the last few years. We've got some concerns with lead goosenecks that would, be related to the lead and copper rules that we need to get addressed. So after kind of going through all this, we decided that we'd like to see St. Mary's added to the capital improvement plan, and that's also what leads into the CDBG grant we're going to talk about later. So you can see the capital improvement plan there is added. East and West St. Mary's streets, we added those in for 2023 and 2026, and then it goes through some of the cost estimates, and then it also will go into kind of what the project would entail. So in these, both of them would be increasing water main size. Most of the water main is gonna be either 4-inch or 6-inch, depending on where you're at. And it'll be cast iron water main. The proposal here would be to improve that to 8-inch ductile iron. One of the big advantages is gonna be obviously bigger flow rates. We'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about the CDBG grant, but that's what this would entail, was just essentially adding those two items to the capital improvement plan that we have in place.
Any questions from the council?
I have a question, actually, it's a question from my husband, who didn't want to come to the meeting, but, when they tore the tower down by Midwest Fastener,
Okay.
he seemed to recall that they ran larger mains, is that not the case? From Eli over here down to this part of St. Mary's?
I think there is from St. Mary's, or, from.
I think there's one block or something, if I remember.
Eli?
Yeah, I think it might be a little bit coming just to the east here as well, but I think it goes down to William Street.
To Williams?
I think that's 12-inch, and then it went 12-inch down to Sherwood.
Yeah, because I think Jimmy said there was one block where there had been some improvement, but
Yep.
the rest of it was still the old 4- and 6-inch cast iron.
Yeah, because I know in 2005, when we extended to Special Light, when they did their expansion, we installed 12-inch from Sherwood. We connected to a 12-inch at that intersection and ran that all the way up to Special Light. And I think that was creating pretty close to a 12-inch feed from the tower to Special Light. Fire flow is a big concern out there.
Yep.
So I think that was filling that gap. But the rest of the St. Mary's, either 4-inch or 6-inch. As Matt mentioned, it's cast iron, it's the older stuff, so 4-inch water main is not permittable for municipal water systems anymore. 6-inch is the minimum, 8-inch is recommended. Most of the time, we'll do 8-inch now. If we have a good network, we'll fill it in with 6. If we got 8-inch here, there's 8-inch here and 8-inch here, we'll put 6-inch just in between them. That would be just fine. But we don't install 4-inch, we can't, because can't get it permitted. So everything is 6 or larger if there's a demand for it.
Yep.
So I think you're correct in that one block of it, but I think the rest of it is, most of it's 4, there's a couple blocks of 6 in there.
Yep.
And the biggest concern, so really all of your 4-inch and 6-inch, all of your cast iron water mains should be replaced at some point. If they're younger or the newer ones have a little more life in them, but cast iron is more brittle and it's susceptible. I mean, just some vibrations, it can pop a joint and it starts leaking. The ductile is much more forgiving. I mean, you can pound on that stuff and it's more durable, and it can move a little bit. So you're not unique. Every community in the state of Michigan or the country, especially the older water systems, they were built with cast iron water main. And a lot of smaller stuff, because when water systems were built, fire protection wasn't a concern. It was just strictly about letting you turn on your tap and drink water and flush a toilet, and that was about it. Also didn't have dishwashers, washing machines were as big of a thing. But those aren't a huge burden on the system, but you put them in every house and add them up, and so larger mains they just evolved, and that's kind of the history, I guess, of where we're at size-wise for the water systems.
How did we miss that St. Mary's Street with all the, I've been looking at the capital improvement plans for over the years.
Yeah.
How come we never mentioned?
So I think-
We mentioned Cedar, we mentioned Beale Street, we mentioned the other roads, and how come now this one?
Great question. I think as Matt mentioned, Jimmy brought that up in some recent breaks, and maintenance is a big part of the driver. So we look at some areas where we put together the capital improvement plan, looking at the areas that can have the greatest impact from a flow perspective, perhaps, but then, and at the time, we talked about areas that had a history of breaks that were really headaches, and I don't think that was as much on the forefront. Now you've had some more breaks in the recent years, and it's not uncommon that when an area or a stretch of main that was installed at the same time, you start having a break. Next year, you have another one. A year or two later, you have another one, it just seems to kind of go like that, so, so that's the reason I think I'll answer your question, it's a great question, but I think that's come more to the forefront in Jimmy's mind because that's fresh now. When we did the water asset management plan, I think that was 2016 or 17.
Yep.
And as Matt mentioned, you know, you guys followed the rule. You had to have, supposed to have it done by January 1st of 17. I think we adopted it in January of 17. I think we, you know,
It was
a lot of
right
communities
there.
listed by a lot more than that. You followed the rules, and I think out in May or June, lead and copper rules came out. So your water asset management plan was essentially outdated in 6 months. And you're required, like every other municipal water system, to do an inventory of your lead services. And the first step is, let's get a little more detail here. The first step is a desk inventory, just from your knowledge, from the operator's knowledge. What do we know is copper? What do we know is lead? And what is unknown? And there are some unknowns on this corridor. And so you fill out that desk inventory. Step 2, by January 1st, 2025, all of your unknowns. And we applied for a grant for this. We haven't heard back on it yet, but you have to physically investigate them and basically confirm or certify how many lead services you have. And then you have 20 years to get all of those replaced. And the village, out of your water fund, is responsible to replace those from the main to inside the home, 18 inches inside the home. You can't do assessments, can't charge the individual, it has to be out of every user's water fees that are paid in, have to pay that cost. And you're gonna be required, the rule is you're supposed to do 5% a year. Can you wait till 2045 and do them all? No, you would get in trouble for that. So you have to make progress, so, and they're saying at least 5% a year, so really you're gonna have to have them done before then. And what a lot of communities are doing is find out how many you have, and then group them together, put together one contract, or if you have a lot, like Kalamazoo is doing, 1,000 a year or something like that, but put together, maybe put together 25 or 50%, do a $300,000, $500,000 contract, go knock those out. 5 years later, do another, 50% of it, whatever, knock it out. And so, and you won't know what that's gonna look like until you do the physical inventory, and then those costs should be added to your water asset management plan and your capital improvements plan as well.
Now, I guess I would note too, there's still a little bit of uncertainty there. I mean, as Mickey alluded to, with knowing exactly what we're looking at in terms of the number of services, we have a pretty good idea on the knowns and unknowns, but of those unknowns, are they all, are they not? There's still a lot of question there. So but when we went through the water rate changes, we did actually build in, I think it was roughly 50,000 annually in expenses for lead and copper. So if you extrapolate that out, I mean, some of those costs can actually be kind of brought into what we're looking at here, if the big bulk of this is lead and copper. So we are kind of getting to a point where we're planning those things and trying to make sure we're kind of future-proofing our plans here for that. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely going to be some modifications that probably come additionally for the CIP here also as we get more information as to what we have to do.
Any more questions? There's no questions, a motion to approve the revised water CIP as presented.
I'll make the motion to approve the revised water CIP grant.
Okay, we need a second.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Public hearing, next item is public hearing. I need a motion to open the public hearing, even though there was no waiver, we're required by law to do that, so need a motion to.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
Trustee Jones, need a second.
I'll second that.
Trustee Hunter, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, so motion carries, so public hearing, there is nobody from the public to participate, so I need a motion to close the public hearing. Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were the engineer, I'm sorry.
Well, so,
I'm talking about the community public.
I do want to just share a quick overview, and one of the couple things that are required to be in the application is a summary of the public hearing. So, how many people attended, what was generally said, so if I could just give a quick overview so that can be in there. And just, so you know, Kim, it's not the official minutes, but probably tomorrow, I need just a paragraph of what was said, you just, I can help with that. So we're looking at St. Mary Street from the Western Village limits up to Burke, and then Burke up to Edgar Bergen. Just because the water main goes up there where it's, either 4 inch or 6 inch, but part of that same water main that ties in. So those are the project limits, includes water main, replacing all the 4 and 6 inch with 8 inch, we already talked about. All new water services. The water services as part of the project will go to the right-of-way line. This grant from the Community Development Block Grant is administered by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. And they have funds from HUD that flow through, and MEDC is the custodian of those funds. Because these are federal funds, they do not allow construction outside of public right-of-way. So what that means, just so everyone's aware, is that we're gonna replace the water services with copper from the water main to the right-of-way line. If we discover a lead service during construction, the village will be responsible to replace it from the right-of-way line into that home, and that is supposed to happen immediately at that time. So we're gonna have to either get another contractor on board or have Jimmy and his guys ready to go. You can't say, oh, we'll get it next month, next week, or it's supposed to be when the new service connects to the main and runs out. If it was lead, you're supposed to keep on going all the way into the house. So that person's gonna probably get out of water for maybe a day or something, but we're gonna have to coordinate that.
Yeah, there's a process, I know, for that.
And that will be 100% village cost, because you cannot spend these dollars on private property. Now, just a quick sidebar, Eagle has some funding programs to replace lead services, and you can use those funds to go on private property. Those are state funds. And they've made it, because they've required it, they've made the determination that those funds can be used on private property. But Federal Highway Administration, HUD, those agencies do not permit their dollars to be spent outside of public right-of-way or easement. So then the plan with the project, we would put in also a storm system for the entire length of the project. And then the roadway would be fully reconstructed, curb and gutter, kind of like we've done in recent years. We added that on Williams, we added on Bronson, George Street, and as we've done local streets, been adding curb and gutter and storm sewer to those, so it'd be similar to those types of projects. We've done that. Later on your agenda, there's a resolution. I just want to note that resolution is another requirement of the grant application. The application is due May 31st, which oddly is Memorial Day. I don't know why.
It's a weird pick, yeah.
I don't think Kim or Matt or myself want to be working over the holiday weekend.
So busy couple days getting everything finalized.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's where we are tonight. Then additionally, another required attachment is a capital improvements plan that identifies the project. So that was also a driver in updating the capital improvements plan, because it has to be listed in an approved capital improvements plan.
Yep.
Let's see. The MEDC has said that they plan to make offers by June 15th. What they've indicated, so we should find out fairly soon. The budget, the estimated project cost for this is $3.269 million. And we'll add that these grants, this is a very competitive grant. They have $15 million available. The minimum grant is $500,000. The maximum is $2 million. So you're looking at between 8 awardees and 30. Eligible communities are only those that are low, moderate income as defined by HUD, which Decatur is. So I don't know how many there are in the state, probably 40 or 50, I'm gonna guess, something like that. We have
think it was like 53% was the.
Yeah, we're like 52 and some change, I think. But that was just
63%.
We're just on the,
52 point.
just inside the ratio, which is, we talked about this a couple years ago, I think, with the last one we applied for. It's a good thing. You know, the fact that our low to mod income ratio has gone down means that in general, our households are bringing in more money, and people, you know, there's a lower percentage of households in that low to moderate income range. But the downside is that you end up in a situation where some of these grants, you're getting to a point where your scoring is a little lower, because a community that has, say, 65% in that ratio is gonna get more points because there's more distressed, you know, households in that situation.
We wanna discuss this more, we'll discuss this more, but if we're
Okay.
done, I'm gonna close the public hearing.
So I guess one other thing I just want to add is, so the village is at 52.18. We do get 5 points for that. There's a very specific scoring criteria. This does have a larger match at just over $1 million, 1.269. We're a little bit low on the low mod income scale, because you can get 20 points if you have 66% and above. There aren't a lot in that category, but there's a few in the 56 to 60, 61, 65. On the match side, communities that are at 25% and above do get 15 points. This is a minimum 10% match, but you get 0 points for that. And I can tell you that in this competitive grant, at that minimum 10%, you wouldn't fare real well. So.
No.
So that's a benefit. The other thing I shared with Matt is these funds, if awarded, have to be spent by December 31st of 2023. So if we wanted to be aggressive and go after 22 construction, we could do that, or we could push this out to help spread it over an extra fiscal year, or almost 2, I guess.
Yep.
I'll stop the effort now. You happy to answer any questions if there are any?
I would ask you to this. Okay, if there's no more questions, I need a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make the motion to close the public hearing.
Trustee Gunther, any second?
I'll second.
Trustee Benson, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, okay, motion carries. Okay, for the new business now, to discuss the grant, you know, the block grant, you know, so.
Yeah,
We'll talk about that in the last question.
Yeah, I'll touch on just a couple things real quick that we didn't get to in the public hearing. Is that one of the questions we got was, you know, in particular with the respect to the water main, what benefits might there be outside of St. Mary's in particular? So I wanted to touch on a little bit of that when you start looking at most of your water systems, these are all kind of interconnected loops. So I mean, Mickey, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but when you have side streets and things that are connected to this water main, as you get closer, I guess, to St. Mary's, the further away you get, probably the less impact you're going to see. But you know, for at least that first block or two, even if you have, say, 4-inch that comes off on a side street, if the main that's servicing that has an 8-inch, and so you've got a bigger flow there, you're going to also have higher flow rates on those side streets as well. And in particular, where this comes into play is, Mickey talked about this earlier, fire protection. So you're going to get more water flows to your fire hydrants in those side street areas, and that has the potential to lower ISO ratings, which can help with homeowners insurance as well. So, you know, with a lot of these loops of water, St. Mary's actually connects up to quite a few different places. So I think you'll probably see some ancillary benefit, you know, within that first block or two away from where that water main is. And then as you get further out where you've got connections that are also coming from, say, Phelps Street or Phelps, Delaware has some that runs down. You know, as you start getting away from that project area more, you're probably going to see less of an impact. But in that immediate range, kind of nearby, there will be some benefit to those residents as well. This does include sidewalk improvements. So for any areas that don't have sidewalk now, I think most of St. Mary's does, but We'll make sure that you have a fully walkable sidewalk there, and then all of the approaches for the sidewalks will be fixed. So we would make sure that those are all ADA accessible. I think that's a big one. And then with the stormwater portion, we do know that there are at least, I think, 2 to 3 different areas along St. Mary's where we've had some stormwater issues. This would actually be a big improvement. We have kind of put some Band-Aids on some of those with some leaching basins, but something like this would really help address that and make sure we fully fixed as much as we can, at least that area. I mean, I don't think we would have these, I'm assuming it'd be some sort of a catch basin type of a system, but we would have a lot more capacity with a project like this where we were designing it for the whole street. So I think that would actually be a big benefit as well. And then as Mickey was talking about as well, the lead and copper rules do play a factor in this. If there's any lead goosenecks that are part of the supply, that would get replaced as part of this, and those things would have to be done anyway. So the nice thing about doing it as part of a grant project is, at least in that portion, those projects are being done with the dollars we're getting with the grant. If we didn't have this, and we do have those lead goosenecks, we're still gonna have to tear the road up, or we're gonna have to tear up the underground utilities there and still do it regardless. So I think this is a great opportunity to be able to do that. When you look at the density of homes along St. Mary's, it is one of the more dense areas in terms of service lines in all of the village. I mean, there's a few areas, I think, when you look at 3 or 4 streets combined, that they might be higher, but in terms of the number of lots on St. Mary's, it's pretty significant compared to the rest of the village. And then, as Mickey was talking about as well, with the low to mod ratios, obviously the higher, we talked about that, with the higher low to mod rate, percentage, you get more points. What we were getting at with the match here is that the higher of the match percentage you go with, the more points you get with that. So by moving to, I think it's roughly about, was it 26.2% or something in that range, or 25.9? When you're getting above that 25% ratio, you're trying to make up for some of those points that you might lose to another community that is in that 61% low to mod ratio. So, we might get 15 points here, and that might actually help tip the scales towards the village getting that awarded, versus if we had just stuck with the base 10%, we might miss out on that. So yes, it does come at a higher cost, but I think it's a project that has a big impact. It touches on a number of different things that I think would be a big improvement for us. And, from talking with Jimmy, he was pretty dead set that if we were looking at a water project, this was the one that he thought would be the best for us.
Any questions? I got a few, but let everybody else ask the questions first. Any questions?
I do have one question.
Sure.
As the main gets hooked up here on St. Mary's and you make connections to the home, I thought I had read in here that they're putting in a 1-inch water service connection to each home. So now, just from other meetings we've had, it sounds like the 1-inch is quite a bit more substantial price-wise for the residents.
So on that, it's pretty standard. Most communities will put a 1-inch service to the right of way, and then throttle it down to 3/4 or 5/8. Because the longer the run of pipe, there's what's called head loss. So it's kind of like, you open up your spigot, you got water coming out. You put a 50-foot hose on it, it's not coming out with that same force. You screw another hose to that, make it 100 foot, it's dribbling out the end. And that's because as water goes through a pipe, the friction in the pipe slows it down. So typically, I think it's a good practice. Most municipalities will do a 1-inch water service to the right of way. And that way, if somebody has a problem with their flow in their house, it's not the village's issue.
Yeah, and
It's their responsibility from the right of way into their house, or it could be their internal piping.
yeah.
So you're doing your job by getting them, 1 inch, unless someone has a laundromat or something where they're using a whole bunch of water, you've done your due diligence there. If there is a business that has a 2-inch, and if we discovered that, if Jimmy knew about it ahead of time, or 1.5 inch, we would plan for that. If we found it during construction, we would give it to Jimmy and say, hey, we want to put this back as an inch, we want to go like 2-inch. But people's meter, they can put in whatever size meter they want. You can just throttle it down with fittings.
Yep.
And then.
Yeah, so that's one advantage, is that if you're doing the 1-inch on the service side,
Yeah.
than if somebody wanted to have a 1-inch service line, then you're actually getting the full benefit of that 1-inch service. But yeah, it would be throttled down at the meter to 5/8 or 3/4 if that's what somebody has already.
Great question.
That was my
Yep,
question.
yep.
Yeah, so it wouldn't automatically increase costs for
Right, I was like,
residents in the
well,
area.
people might wanna know that.
Yeah, no. It's a good question though.
Any more questions? Okay, I got a question, a few questions for Matt and you.
Sure.
When this is done and you apply for it and you get $1.26 million we have to pay, what that money is, I know I seen your estimates, you said you're gonna $600,000 from the water fund.
Mhm.
500,000 or something from the major road and $100,000 from the
General fund.
general fund.
Yep.
After all that's said done, what would be the fund balance left? What is the total fund balance we have right now?
Well, I think for the water fund right now, I think there's about $703,000. I mean, that will increase over the year as we take additional water revenues. I think what we were kind of alluding to with the timing of the project is if we pushed it back to the 2023 timeline, we can then reassess, some of what was planned and go, okay, is there something we can move around? Is there something we can do to kind of offset some of that? So I think right now we would have the capacity to do that. At the end of the water fund, at the end of this project, you're probably gonna have, I'm guessing at the end of 2023 and this project, if it were approved, you'd probably have about 180,000 maybe in the water fund at that point.
150,000 left, okay. What about
The general fund?
What about the major road? No, the major road is
Yeah,
good.
major
700,000 to 150,000 left. What about the major road?
Major roads, we have, I believe it is 600 and,
Yeah, just give me the numbers.
it's roughly, I think, 639,000 right now. And then we have 170, I think it's 196,000, I think,
Just
in
give me the
the streets
figures.
fund.
Yeah. Just give me the figures and I wanna see the percentage.
Yep.
Matt, what do you typically add to your fund balance for water on an annual basis?
It varies a little bit. I can't remember what we had last year, but it was like, I think, a net increase of about 100,000, somewhere in that
I was
range.
thinking it was north of that.
Do you remember?
Yeah, so with roads, we have 616,000 in our major roads fund right now.
Okay.
And then we also have 125,821 in our streets fund. Or excuse me,
I thought you
excuse me.
only using the major road fund.
Well, yeah, but what I'm getting at, we would have 214,000 in the streets funds. Now the streets funds, this is where some of this kind of deciding on how to allocate funds can kind of come into play, is that our streets fund can actually be allocated to local roads or major roads depending on the needs of your project. So
Yeah, the streets needs to be done too, so I wanted the major road, the major fund for the major road, 616,000.
yes,
And you're gonna spend how much out of that?
that would be 569.
569,000?
Yep. But then you could, like I said, we do have 214,000 in the streets
Yeah.
fund
But,
that could be transferred to major roads if that was necessary.
so if that's, yeah, sometimes it may not be necessary because we need to take care of the other roads too.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also 125,000 in local roads and,
Okay.
um,
I just wanna
Yeah.
make figures so I'll be comfortable making decisions.
sure, yeah, we have 519,000 in the general fund right now. And then we are at, it's roughly 641,000 in the water fund right now, 800,000 in the sewer, but, I believe we, in the budget, we have forecasted, I think it's about a $50,000 surplus for water.
$47,000 from the major fund left, so I'm gonna add 214,000
Mhm.
for the street fund,
Yep,
and what else?
that would be, well, and actually with us, with the pavement asset management plan, essentially, we have a major and local roads, but it used to be that your major roads funds had to be spent on major roads, your local roads had to be spent
Okay,
there.
I need
Now
to-
we have
I need to know
flexibility.
the fund balance after we spend that $569,000 from whatever.
Yeah,
that's
if we took what we have in major roads now, added in the streets funds, you're looking at 830,000, plus whatever we have in tax revenues for this year.
830,000.
And technically, it would also include tax revenues from next year as
I just need,
well.
the reason I'm doing this, I just need the percentage.
Yep.
836,000, I'm gonna spend 569 of that.
And my guess would be, depending on the timing of the project, you might even have some tax revenues that would come in from 2023. If it was, say, late summer 2023, then you could actually bundle that in to have tax proceeds for streets also in that same time span. So you probably could have close to 3 different tax revenue collections before the project would actually be completed. Depending, I mean, some of it depends on contractor availability. It's a big chunk, I know that. It's a lot of money that would be spent, but it's one of those things where, I guess from my take on it, having fund balances that are healthy is important. But by the same token, there is a responsibility to taxpayers to use that money for something beneficial.
No, the reason is I'm asking because I like to see the fund balances at least 30% higher.
Okay.
You know, what do you think? That's why I think would be maybe a little healthy, maybe.
See them how much?
A 30% of fund balance left after you spend the money. Okay, then for the water fund, there's only 21% left after you spend the money. For the major road and for all the roads, all the streets and the roads that you're talking about, that would be 31%.
So does that include adding in the revenues over the next 2 years, like the water fund?
No, I just wanna make sure that we are good, we have 30% or more. I know you guys talked, that's what I'm asking.
Well, and I know there's the
You
USDA
need to convince me that.
USDA loan that we're working on, I mean-
We're gonna be okay.
Granted, I think the USDA loan is specific to that project, but, you know, those revenues will also be there. I mean, there's a lot at play that I think we can use that would give us flexibility.
You know, you probably hear it from your auditor, but a good fund balance for your enterprise funds, water or sewer, is 25 to 30%.
Yep.
That's where you'd like to be. That gives you 1/4 of operations if everybody stopped paying their bills, right? So you wanna have 25 to 30% of a year's budget or typical expenses. So if you're saying, and I hadn't written numbers down, if you're at
21% for the water fund,
So-
that's the percentage.
so that would be low for a fund balance, if you're gonna be that position, you know, next week or next month. The fact that the majority of that wouldn't be expended until, summer of 22 or summer of 23.
Yep.
Means you'd have a minimum of 1 year, because it's gonna be at least a year from now, before you get substantially underway, maybe 2. And on the timing of this, we would definitely wanna set this up so that we bid it in either January or February at the latest, so we get the most favorable pricing then. If we get hung up on permits or something, or, along the way, it gets to be March, even if we were trying to do it 22, we'd probably say, let's pump the brakes here and hold off, because you get into March and April, we've seen construction prices climb 25 to 40% from January to June. So contractors fill up and then the prices just skyrocket, so, timing is a really critical thing when we did this.
Okay, now, we're talking about, we know a year ago or so, we talked about the USDA, you know, the water, for the water and sewer and all that stuff. What is happening with those loans? Are we
Still working through that process. It takes,
Can we use that money for this? Is that, like, are they tied in, that, you know, that those loans with this kind of stuff?
No, I mean, you probably could intermingle a little bit, but the USDA one is focusing over on the Cedar, Kitty,
Douglas Drive.
yeah, over in that area of, I think there's 4 or 5 streets over there that we're looking at, and that's what was,
Yep.
selected and committed to on that one. This is a separate, independent one. And the tough thing, theoretically, yes, they can be combined, but they both, and they will tell you that they're happy to do that, but most of them won't budge on their requirements. And then there's things that just don't lend themselves nicely to integrating well. So,
I think I got the answer for that, but the other question is, we raised the water rates and the sewer rates, you know, last year. Would that be because of the loans we're gonna get? The reason, are we gonna raise those water rates again, like every year to meet these costs?
well,
Or how are we gonna do that?
If
How
you
we gonna
remember-
help?
hey, if you remember the financial presentation from both of those asset management plans, I mean, you really should be raising your rates every year. So
they do.
Yes, they do, okay, now, are we gonna go over that, and that's to meet all these needs, the needs for what you talk about, the USDA funds, this cost?
So the USDA funds were already incorporated into the
Yes.
rate structure for water. So those are already baked in.
Okay,
You'll
so
have-
it's not gonna affect this?
Yep, and we'll have to have a rate consultant and bond counsel to come in and make sure that there's an ordinance in place, that the current rates will satisfy the debt retirement before we can close on the USDA loan. That'll be a requirement, so. They might say everything's great right where it is, it might require an adjustment, depends where things are at then, but like Matt said, those were both of those projects were built into the asset management plans.
The reason I'm asking questions, I'm not expert in
Yeah.
this, but you're the engineer, he's the manager, you guys talk about this.
Here's a question.
Are we in a good spot if we, I say, within about 25, 30, I mean, I see 21%, 30%. With the revenues you said, Matt, you're gonna get in a couple of years, I think is gonna boost that percentage to a higher number.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that, given a, you know, with what Mickey was saying, I would think probably if we were, especially if we were looking at a 2023 timeframe, that would give us plenty of opportunity to be able to plan around that and look at any other projects we have, you know, looking at our revenues we're gonna forecast, you know, streets projects, et cetera, you know, we would have plenty of opportunity to be able to coordinate this so that we're not putting the village in a spot where we're in a bad place in terms of our
Because, you know,
fundamentals.
this is not the only project we're
No,
planning to have,
no.
so.
Now, one question I guess I'm curious about is, since the USDA loan is still in progress, is there anything that would allow us to roll any of these costs into that application as an additional component of that? Or no?
Only if it was part of the USDA contract.
Okay,
Your preliminary engineering report and environmental review must encompass everything that you're doing, and then it all has to be bid through USDA's process, so that's where you can't
okay.
intermingle. That's a good question, though.
You know, this is a lot of money, that's the reason I'm asking these questions.
No, that's true.
We haven't, I don't think we did, I don't think I can remember that we bought this, I mean, we cost the village, usually 80-20 or something like that, not this big amount of money that we're gonna spend on St. Mary's State. Any questions from the council? We have a resolution here to approve resolution 2021-003, which is is that what the resolution is?
Yes.
The CDBG grant, which is, there's any questions, if the council's comfortable with approving this project, then you can have a motion for that. Everybody's clear, you know. Need a motion for approving this resolution.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2021-005.
No, it's
003, I'm sorry.
It's not in there, so.
003.
2021-003, which is the grant for this St. Mary's. I need a second, please.
I'll second that.
Steve, roll call, please.
Trustee Benson?
Yes.
Trustee Gunther?
Yes.
Pro Tem Jackson?
Yes.
Trustee Mead? Trustee Pelfrey?
Yes.
Trustee Brand? President Howard?
Yes. So all in favor of the second, all in favor, motion carries. All right, the next item on the agenda is category B.
Yeah, so another grant that we're seeking here, MDOT Category B. So Category B is a little bit different. That's a 50-50 grant was how that would work. Much like we did, I don't think we had one last year, but I believe it was 2019. If I'm not mistaken, George was actually what we had applied for at that time as well. The interesting thing about George Street is that from South George, from Phelps to Prairie Ronde is federal aid eligible, and then Prairie Ronde also is as well. But so we've had opportunities through Rural Task Force and other federal funds to be able to do that section of George Street. What becomes more of a challenge, and if you drive out there, it's pretty obvious. I take George pretty regularly, and once you get past Prairie Ronde, you can see where we haven't kept up on that particular stretch of road. Mostly because it's a major road. There's a pretty good sized cost with that. It needs a lot of work. So we thought that would be a prime candidate for Category B. I think when you look at the projects the village has pursued through these grant programs, especially through Rural Task Force, we had Phelps was a part of that back in, what was that, 2014 or 13, somewhere in there?
We did, North Phelps was 2009 with the stimulus program. We've done South Williams, we've done South George.
Prairie Ronde is coming up.
Prairie Ronde is coming up. Yep.
So, you start looking at the major arteries of the village, so to speak, and we've basically got a plan to touch on most of them. George is kind of that one outlier that we really hadn't done much with, and so we thought this would be a great opportunity to pursue that. With this particular project, it would be a reconstruction of the road in that area, and I believe it would also address, is there some stormwater components also, Mickey?
Yep, so this one, similar scope to what we had for Prairie Ronde. So those two roads are more rural in nature, I would say, and so what we plan for those is to pulverize the roadway, construct some shallow swales next to the road instead of the curb and gutter and storm sewer, which is very expensive. But we put in shallow ditches or swales next to the road to get that water off the road, because the water is what causes the problem. You can see it on Prairie Ronde right now. South George does have some slope to it as you're heading out, so like the water does move, but then you got a couple of low points there where not quite as much, and then the south end it does continue to the south where it becomes a county road. But we plan on pulverizing the roads where they grind up the asphalt with the underlying gravel, mix it together, it makes a great base for a new road, and then we pave on top of that. Widen it a little bit, give it some shoulders, put the swales in, and then additionally, I believe we had some water main replacement in that, because that is, I believe that's a 4-inch cast iron if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
As Matt mentioned, this one is a Category B, targets local roads. And I can say, other than these occasional MEDC projects, that these opportunities that come up, there's not been funding for local roads. That's been 100% local. So This is a great program MDOT came out with. They came out with this in 2019 and they made a 5-year commitment to it. So this is not here in perpetuity right now. This calls for 22 and then 23 is the final year of it. They may extend it, which would be great, but this is helping is for communities with populations under 10,000. You get extra consideration if it's a local road. You can apply to use these funds on federal aid eligible routes, but you probably won't get funded. You get additional consideration if you're replacing any other underground utilities with it, so water main or sanitary sewer. And it's 50-50 split on the roadway construction costs. So this one had a estimated roadway cost of $338,000, which would be $169,000 for the village, $169,000 for MDOT.
Yeah, it's one of the few programs where you actually get a grant that's going to cover anything on a local street.
Other than the CDBG one that we just talked about, that was an opportunity that comes out every so often. And we've used that in the past on Mill Street. We used that on South William Street originally when that was reconstructed in '05. And we've used the CDBG funds for several water main replacements, putting 12-inch water main on South George Street, and also putting some 8-inch in Sherwood Street as part of Midwest Fastener expansion.
You said the CBD fund is that CBG water fund. Isn't that, you said that's a federal fund?
Those are HUD monies that flow through to the states, and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation is the custodian or manages those funds.
Now, you know, they're talking about the $1.8 trillion at the Congress, whatever they're gonna approve. Would that affect the communities like us?
I think it could. I mean, you guys are getting an appropriation, I believe, from the CARES Act, I believe, so.
And local infrastructure is going to be water infrastructure in particular, I believe.
So
is
would
important.
that benefit us for doing these things?
Not right
Paying
now.
back, whatever?
Yeah, there are not programs announced right now for that, but I'm sure they will be. I mean, I can't remember the number I've heard, but there's how many billions left from the first stimulus that was passed that they haven't even gotten to yet, and we're on the third one right now, so the federal departments can't even keep up with the speed of Congress passing more spending bills, so there may be something along those lines, but we haven't seen any formal calls for projects or programs that are out at this time.
And I think one of the things with that, the appropriation that's going to come down to local governments. I think we are a non-entitlement community in that regard. We haven't really seen the formulas yet for what we're going to be getting, but water infrastructure is one of those categories where we're going to see those funds can be eligible for those expenses. You're limited on what you can use those things for.
I understand, but you think if we get some money, could we put it like in our funds to replace what we spent? That's
So
what
so to your point, what could happen with this, Ali? So we move forward with this. Let's say, so I think with the CARES, there's restrictions on what you can spend that on and what you can't. But let's say it comes out and says, okay, this money has to be spent on, let's say it's generally infrastructure, or if it's even water, and you find out in November of '21 when this comes out. Well, yes, you've already, and we'll have to see what kind of restrictions. They might say anything from this date forward, or it might say anything from January 1st of '21. Well, then instead of depleting your water fund, or if you get some money in, you could use that money as the match money for CDBG or for this category B.
So that's kind of one of those outliers there we haven't talked about, where I think that will also serve as a big benefit for us.
I don't have a phone line to Joe's desk there, so I don't know what the details are gonna be. And
He won't know either.
But I guess just, I mean, I'm speculating, I just want to be clear, I'm speculating here, but I've heard the same chatter you guys have about the infrastructure spending. Obviously, we're watching that, but we haven't seen any details on what that program could entail. But if something comes out, I would suspect they would structure it similar to the CARES Act and the restrictions you have and where that money can be spent. It's not just gonna be a blank check, it has to go for something, and is it gonna be any water infrastructure,
Well,
but boom, if you're already in place, then you're all set to go.
Well, we already know under the American Recovery Plan, that passed, we already know there's money allocated to local governments as part of that. I don't know what we're getting yet, there's, the state, I think there's a total amount for the state, and they've got your big cities and counties, I think they've already allocated that stuff. In the non-entitlement communities, we don't really know yet exactly what that'll be, but I know those funds are also, your critical infrastructure is also a part of that. That money we know we will get. I mean, I can't tell you exactly how much it's gonna be, but, that's also one of those things. So if you take into account that we already know about, we're just waiting on final totals, plus any benefits we might see from an infrastructure plan that gets passed. I mean, I think there's a number of avenues here where getting ahead on some of these things and getting, at least partial grants that are gonna cover this will only benefit us in that we should be able to then leverage those additional funds that would come in to help offset the costs we're gonna see with some of these things. And
So these these you're talking about, they're gonna be done in parallel, basically. So what is-
So this MDOT one, these funds have to be spent in 22. So what we're talking about right now, it's a great question, Ally. So, these funds have to be spent by December 31st of 2022. They typically find out in August, and I think, I've had some other communities, I think they got tipped off, but these are state monies, and the legislature has to approve them each year. So even though it's a 5-year program, they have to approve them each year. So typically it's November. I mean, the fiscal year starts October 1. This will not be the top thing on their priority list, I'm sure. It's usually late October, early November, those get approved. That's when you get a formal agreement, but if you get tipped off that you're recommended, it's usually in August, I think we had last time. So we got other communities that I worked with, we got them designed, and we tried to bid them in that January, February timeframe as well, take advantage of best prices. So we have that same strategy.
Well, and I think that's why, when we look at projects into the future, we know we've got Prairie Run for 22, although that's a 90-10 with the RTF fund, so the cost to the village.
80-20.
Or, yeah, 80-20, excuse me. The cost to the villages there really is actually fairly minimal when you look at.
That's the ones I
Prairie Run.
like, 80-20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you look at, if you couple these two, you could have Prairie Run and George done in 22, and then going back to the St. Mary's project, that one you could probably push back to 23, and then that gives you, again, some flexibility with planning out your pavement assets, planning out your water assets, and, incorporating those other funding sources to make sure this all works.
And you could have the USDA in 23 as well.
Yeah.
That's pretty realistic.
I know this is after the fact, we discussed, I forgot to ask the question about the CBD grant. You said the private property, that the village is responsible for whatever the lead issue.
Yep.
Is that incorporated in the cost? The 2 million, 3 million?
So replacing all of the services from the new water main to the right of way line,
Yeah.
that's included.
Yes. What do you think is gonna cost the village, the private?
Now, the only thing I can think of, and I don't know, maybe I'm off on this, Mickey, but I know that there is some contingency built in.
Yeah.
It's possible that if pricing is favorable, that some of that contingency would apply towards the cost of those services. I think what was the contingency? It was like 169,000 or something like that?
Like 257.
Yeah, so if we get good pricing, and I think if we're looking out that far ahead, chances of us being able to bid this out and getting a good price number is probably high, then some of that contingency that we have allocated could then apply towards the cost of some of those services as well.
I don't want that to be another $500,000 to do, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think
it is-
that would then give us a head start too, because I mean, no matter what, and it's a frustrating element, and I think a lot of communities are grappling with this, but with the way the lead and copper rules have come out, is that, you don't have a choice. You have to do it. And so I think in some ways, coupling it with a project like this where we're offsetting at least some of those costs, and if you're already tearing up, the underground infrastructure there anyway, it makes sense to try to look at those sorts of projects in conjunction with a grant like this.
Any more questions? If there's no questions, I need a motion to approve resolution 2021-004 as presented, which is the MDOT category B grant.
I move to approve resolution 2021-004 as presented.
Trustee Benson, need a second?
I'll second.
Trustee Buckley? Roll call, please.
Trustee Benson?
Yes.
Trustee Gunther?
Yes.
Pro Tem Jackson?
Yes.
Trustee Mead? Trustee Pelfrey?
Yes.
Trustee Varian? President Aller?
Yes, the motion carries. Next item on the agenda is Resolution 2021-005, delinquent tax collection.
Yep. And one thing I guess I'll touch on just real quick with those resolutions that we passed, you know, sometimes the costs that the village would incur come to be top of mind and you get a little concerned about that. But the one thing I want to reiterate is that if we were awarded both of those grants, you're also talking about $2.2 million of grant funds that will be coming into the village as well. I think that is something that would be a huge benefit to us. So yeah, there is concern about making sure we balance this so that the budget supports all of that, but you know, having that level of funding from grants to help support our operations here is a really big component also. Getting on to resolution 2021, excuse me, that should be 005 in the packet, sorry about that. I think it was just my note up there, I didn't have it right. Pursuant to the discussion we had at the May regular meeting, Clerk and Treasurer Babcock and I worked on a final resolution for the delinquent tax collections. We actually ran this through Tricia Nesbitt, the county treasurer, as well to make sure she was good with it. She signed off on this as well. So one of the things that I think is nice about this, we talked about incorporating this into our annual budget resolution. After looking at a couple different communities out there and talking with Tricia, we found that we can actually make this a perpetual decision based on just this single resolution. So essentially what this does is it extends the tax collections for the village from September 15th to the last day of February of that next following the tax year. So normally the 15th of September we turn it over. Now we'll collect taxes through February 28th, or in a leap year the 29th, and then that next day it gets submitted to the treasurer after that. And then this would continue in perpetuity unless revoked by a further resolution. So if 2, 3, 5 years from now, whatever it is, the council says, you know what, we don't want to do this anymore, you just pass a resolution to revoke this one and you go back to the old system, or you could take it to the township, you know, that was that option that was discussed, etc. So the nice thing is once we do this, we don't have to do it again. It just continues on every year after that.
If there's no questions, I need a motion to approve resolution 2021-005 as presented.
I'll make the motion to approve as long as you change it on the actual resolution, because you have
Yeah.
2021-04.
My fault.
So, with that change.
As amended.
I it's mixed up.
My fault. I was going through and working on some of the resolutions and renumbered a few of them, and I must have missed this one. My fault.
Good catch.
Yes.
Okay, did you make a motion?
I made the motion.
Okay, I need a second.
I'll second.
Trustee Gunther, I need a roll call, please.
Trustee Benson?
Yes.
Trustee Gunther?
Yes.
Pro Tem Jackson?
Yes.
Trustee Mead? Trustee Pelfrey?
Yes.
Trustee Varian? President Aller?
Yes, all in favor, the motion carries. Next item on the agenda is public comments. You know, want to make a comment, right? Council comments? Come here, anything?
Nothing.
Anything? I don't have anything. So, you know, the last item here, I need a motion for adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, let's see, Anthony, a second.
I'll second.
Steve Benson, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.